Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Today I will show it information about Japan. Japan, island country lying off the east coast of Asia. It consists of a great string of islands in a northeast-southwest arc that stretches for approximately 1,500 miles, 2,400 kilometers, through the western North Pacific Ocean. Nearly the entire land area is taken up by the country's four main islands. From north to south these are Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. Honshu is the largest of the four, followed in size by Hokkaido, Kyushu, and Shikoku. In addition, there are numerous smaller islands, the major groups of which are the Ryukyu, Nansei, Islands, including the island of Okinawa, to the south and west of Kyushu and the Izu, Bonin, Ogasawara, and Volcano, Kazen, Islands to the south and east of central Honshu. The national capital, Tokyo, in east-central Honshu, is one of the world's most populous cities. The Japanese landscape is rugged, with more than 4/5 of the land surface consisting of mountains. There are many active and dormant volcanoes, including Mount Fuji, Fujisan, which, at an elevation of 12,388 feet, 3,776 meters, is Japan's highest mountain. Abundant precipitation and the generally mild temperatures throughout most of the country have produced a lush vegetation cover and, despite the mountainous terrain and generally poor soils, have made it possible to raise a variety of crops. Japan has a large and, to a great extent, ethnically homogeneous population, which is heavily concentrated in the low-lying areas along the Pacific coast of Honshu. Complexity and contrast are the keynotes of life in Japan, a country possessing an intricate and ancient cultural tradition, yet one that, since 1950, has emerged as one of the world's most economically and technologically advanced societies. Heavy emphasis is placed on education, and Japan is one of the world's most literate countries. Tension between old and new is apparent in all phases of Japanese life. A characteristic sensitivity to natural beauty and a concern with form and balance are evident in such cities as Kyoto and Nara, as well as in Japan's ubiquitous gardens. Even in the countryside, however, the impact of rapid westernization is evident in many aspects of Japanese life. The agricultural regions are characterized by low population densities and well-ordered rice fields and fruit orchards, whereas the industrial and urbanized belt along the Pacific coast of Honshu is noted for its highly concentrated population, heavy industrialization, and environmental pollution. Humans have occupied Japan for tens of thousands of years, but Japan's recorded history begins only in the 1st century BCE, with mention in Chinese sources. Contact with China and Korea in the early centuries CE brought profound changes to Japan, including the Chinese writing system, Buddhism, and many artistic forms from the continent. The first steps of political unification of the country occurred in the late 4th and early 5th centuries CE under the Yamato court. A great civilization then developed first at Nara in the 8th century and then at Heiankyo, now Kyoto, from the late 8th to the late 12th century. The 7 centuries thereafter were a period of domination by military rulers culminating in near isolation from the outside world from the early 17th to the mid-19th century. The reopening of the country ushered in contact with the West and a time of unprecedented change. Japan sought to become a modern industrialized nation and pursued the acquisition of a large overseas empire, initially in Korea and China. By late 1941 this latter policy caused direct confrontation with the United States and its allies and to defeat in World War II, 1939–45. Since the war, however, Japan's spectacular economic growth, one of the greatest of any nation in that period, brought the country to the forefront of the world economy. It now is one of the world's foremost manufacturing countries and traders of goods and is a global financial leader. Japan is bounded to the west by the Sea of Japan, East Sea, which separates it from the eastern shores of South and North Korea and southeastern Siberia, Russia, to the north by La Perouse, Soya, Strait, separating it from Russian-held Sakhalin Island, and by the Sea of Okhotsk, to the northeast by the southern Kuril Islands, since World War II under Soviet and then Russian administration, to the east and south by the Pacific, and to the southwest by the East China Sea, which separates it from China. The island of Tsushima lies between northwestern Kyushu and southeastern South Korea and defines the Korea Strait on the Korean side and the Tsushima Strait on the Japanese side. The mountainous character of the country is the outcome of orogenic, mountain building, forces largely during Quaternary time, roughly, the past 2.6 million years, as evidenced by the frequent occurrence of violent earthquakes, volcanic activity, and signs of change in sea levels along the coast. There are no sizable structural plains and peneplains, large land areas leveled by erosion, features that usually occur in more stable regions of the Earth. The mountains are for the most part in a youthful stage of dissection in which steep slopes are incised by dense river-valley networks. Rivers are mostly torrential, and their valleys are accompanied by series of river terraces that are the result of movements in the Earth's crust, as well as climatic and sea level changes in Holocene times, i.e., the past 11,700 years. Recent volcanoes are juxtaposed with old and highly dissected ones. The shores are characterized by elevated and depressed features such as headlands and bays, which display an incipient stage of development. The mountains are divided into many small land blocks that are separated by lowlands or deep saddles. There is no long or continuous mountain range. These land blocks are the result of intense faulting, movement of adjacent rock masses along a fracture, and warping, bending of the Earth's crust. The former process is regarded as dominant. One consequence is that mountain blocks are often bounded by fault scarps and flexure slopes that descend in step formation to the adjacent lowlands. Coalescing alluvial fans, cone-shaped deposits of alluvium that run together, are formed where rivers emerge from the mountains. When the rivers are large enough to extend their courses to the sea, low deltaic plains develop in front of the fans. This occurs most frequently where the rivers empty into shallow and sheltered bays, as in the deltas of Kanto, Kwanto, Nobi, and Osaka. In most places, however, fan surfaces plunge directly into the sea and are separated by low, sandy beach ridges. Dissected plains are common. Intense disturbances have caused many former alluvial fans, deltas, and sea bottoms to be substantially uplifted to form flat-topped uplands such as those found in the Kanto Plain. Frequently the uplands have been overlain with volcanic ash, as in the Kanto and Tokachi plains. Japan is one of the world's most geologically unstable areas. The country experiences some 1,000 tremors annually, most of them minor, though major quakes as in Tokyo Yokohama in 1923 and Kobe in 1995 cause considerable loss of life and widespread destruction. Violent volcanic eruptions occur frequently, and at least 60 volcanoes have been active within historical time. Volcanoes born since 1900 include Showa Volcano on Hokkaido and Nojin Rock off the Baianizu, or Baianese, rocks in the Pacific. Among the major eruptions since 1980 are those of Mount So, 1983, and Mihara, 1986, in the Aizu Islands and Mount Onzen, 1991, in Kyushu. The country's abundant hot springs are mostly of volcanic origin. Many of the gigantic volcanoes are conical in shape, example Mount Fuji, while others form steep lava domes, example Mount Stai and Onzen. Conspicuous shield volcanoes, broad, gently sloping volcanic cones, are rare, and extensive lava plateaus are lacking. One of the characteristics of the volcanic areas is the prevalence of calderas, large, circular, basin-shaped volcanic depressions, especially in the northeast and southwest, many of which are filled with water, such as Lakes Kuchiro, Toeda, and Ashi. The cause of this instability, indeed, the reason for Japan's existence, is the tectonic movement of several of the Earth's major crustal plates in the vicinity of the archipelago. Most important is the subduction, sinking, of the Pacific Plate, in the north, and the Philippine Plate, in the south, beneath the Eurasian Plate, upon which Japan lies. The movements of these plates have formed 6 mountain arcs off the northeastern coast of Asia, from northeast to southwest, the Tsushima Range of the Kuril Islands, the Karafuto-Sakhalin mountain system of Hokkaido, the northeast, southwest, and Shichito-Mariana ranges of Honshu, and the Ryukyu Island formations. These mountain arcs, in turn, generally correspond to Japan's major physiographic regions, the 4 regions of Japan proper, Hondo, Hokkaido, northeastern, Tohoku, central, Chubu, and southwestern, and the Ryukyu and Bonin archipelagos. The Hokkaido region was formed by the coalescence of the Tsushima and Karafuto arcs. The backbone of the region is aligned north to south. The Tsushima arc enters Hokkaido as 3 volcanic chains with elevations above 6,000 feet, 1,800 meters. These are arranged in ladder formation and terminate in the heart of the region. Chief components of the mountain system are the Kitami Mountains in the north and the Hidaka Range in the south. The northeastern region nearly coincides with the northeastern mountain arc and stretches from southwest Hokkaido to central Honshu. Several rows of mountains, lowlands, and volcanic zones are closely oriented to the general trend of the insular arc of this region, which is convex toward the Pacific Ocean. The Kitakami and Abukuma ranges on the east coast are somewhat oblique to the general trend. They are chiefly composed of older rocks, and plateau-like landforms survive in the center. In the western zone, the formations conform to the general trend and are composed of a basement complex overlain by thick accumulations of young rocks that have been subjected to mild folding. The O Mountains, capped with towering volcanoes that form the main part of the East Japan volcanic belt, are separated from the coastal ranges by the Kitakami-Abukuma lowlands to the east and by a row of basins in the west. The central region of central and western Honshu is dominated by the coalescence of the northeast, southwest, and Shichido-Mariana mountain arcs near Mount Fuji. The trend of the mountains, lowlands, and volcanic zones intersects the island almost at right angles. The most notable physical feature is the Fossa Magna, a great rift lowland that traverses the widest portion of Honshu from the Sea of Japan to the Pacific. It is partially occupied by mountains and volcanoes of the southern part of the East Japan volcanic belt. Intermontane basins are sandwiched between the lofty, partially glaciated central mountain knots of the Akaishi, Kiso, and Hida ranges, which together form the Japanese Alps, to the west and the Kanto range to the east. The shallow structural basin of the Kanto Plain, which stretches to the east of the Kanto Range, is the most extensive lowland of Japan. The immense metropolis of Tokyo spreads out from its center, covering a vast area of the plain. The southwestern region, which includes western Honshu, Chugoku, as well as Shikoku and northern Kyushu, generally coincides with the southwestern mountain arc, and the general trend of highlands and lowlands is roughly convex toward the Sea of Japan. The region is divided into the inner zone, formed by complex faulting, and the outer zone, formed by warping. The inner zone is chiefly composed of ancient granites, rocks of Paleozoic age, 250 to 540 million years old, and geologically more recent volcanic rocks, which are arranged in complicated juxtaposition. The outer zone, consisting of the Akaishi, Ki, Shikoku, and Kyushu mountain groups, in contrast, is characterized by irregular zonal arrangement from north to south of crystalline schists and Paleozoic, Mesozoic, 65 to 250 million years old, and Cenozoic, formed within the past 65 million years, formations. The outstanding surface features of the inner zone, centered on the Chugoku Range, present a highly complex mosaic of numerous fault blocks, while those of the outer zone are continuous except where the sea straits separate them into the four independent groups. The inland sea, Seto-Naikai, is the region where the greater amount of depression has resulted in the invasion of seawaters. The northern edge of the inner zone is studded with gigantic lava domes formed by Mount Dai, which, together with volcanic Mount Aso, bury a considerable part of the western extension of the inland sea in central Kyushu. The Ryukyu Islands region constitutes the main portion of the Ryukyu Arc, which penetrates into Kyushu as the West Japan volcanic belt and terminates at Mount Aso. The influence of the arc is also seen in the trend of the many elongated islands off western Kyushu, including the Koshiki, Goto, and Tsushima Islands. The islands of the Aizu Ogasawara region, to the east of the Ryukyu Arc, consist of a number of volcanoes on the submarine ridge of the Aizu Marina Arc and the Bonin Islands, which include Peel Island and Iwo Jima. The Japanese people constitute the overwhelming majority of the population. They are ethnically closely akin to the other peoples of Eastern Asia. During the Edo, Tokugawa period, 1603 to 1867, there was a social division of the populace into four classes: warrior, farmer, craftsman, and merchant, with a peer class above and an outcast class below. With the exception of the burocumen, literally, people of the hamlet, the descendants of the former outcast class, this social class system has almost disappeared. The burocumen, however, are still subject to varying degrees of discrimination. Insofar as a social class system does persist, it does not have the ethnic basis that can exist in multiracial societies, since the Japanese regard themselves as belonging to a single ethnic group. The few exceptions include those classified as resident aliens, particularly Koreans, and Japanese citizens of Ainu and, to a much lesser degree, Okinawan origin. Japan also has a small population of Chinese descent. Hundreds of thousands of Koreans migrated to Japan, a great many against their will, before and during World War II, when Korea was a Japanese colony, and worked mainly as laborers. Those remaining after the war and their descendants, the latter born and raised in Japan, do not have Japanese citizenship and face considerable discrimination. Japanese is the national language, and Ainu is almost extinct. The Japanese language is generally included in the Altaic linguistic group and is especially akin to Korean, although the vocabularies differ. Some linguists also contend that Japanese contains elements of Southeast Asian languages. The introduction of the Chinese writing system and of Chinese literature about the 4th century CE enriched the Japanese vocabulary. Until that time, Japanese had no written form, and at first Chinese characters, called kanji in Japanese, were used to write Japanese. By the 9th century, 2 syllabaries, known collectively as kana, katakana, and hiragana, were developed from them. Since then, a combination of kanji and kana has been used for written Japanese. Although some 3,000 to 5,000 kanji are in general use, after World War II the number of characters necessary for a basic vocabulary was reduced to about 2,000, and the writing of these characters was simplified. Tens of thousands of Western loanwords, principally from English, also have been adopted. The distribution of Japanese nearly coincides with the territory of Japan. Standard Japanese, based on the dialect spoken in Tokyo, was established in the late 19th century through the creation of a national educational system and through more widespread communication. There are many local dialects, which are often mutually unintelligible, but Standard Japanese, widely used in broadcasting, is understood nationwide. Japanese is broadly divided linguistically into the 2 major dialects of Hondo and Nanto. The Hondo dialect is used throughout Japan and may be divided into 3 major subdialects: Eastern, Western, and Kyushu. The Eastern subdialects were established in the 7th and 8th centuries and became known as the Azuma, Eastern, language. After the 17th century there was a vigorous influx of the Kamigata, Kinai, subdialect, which was the foundation of Standard Japanese. Among the Western subdialects, the Kinki version was long the standard language of Japan, although the present Kamigata subdialect of the Kyoto-Osaka region is of relatively recent origin. The Kyushu subdialects have been placed outside the mainstream of linguistic change of the Western dialects and retain some of the 16th century forms of the latter. They extend as far south as Taniga and Yaku Islands. The Nanto dialects are used by Okinawa Islanders from the Amami Islands in Kagoshima Prefecture to Yanaguni Island at the western end of the archipelago. Long placed outside the mainstream of linguistic change, they strongly retain their ancient forms. The indigenous religion of Japan, Shinto, coexists with various sects of Buddhism, Christianity, and some ancient shamanistic practices, as well as a number of new religions, Shinko Shukyo, that have emerged since the 19th century. Not one of the religions is dominant, and each is affected by the others. Thus, it is typical for one person or family to believe in several Shinto gods and at the same time belong to a Buddhist sect. Intense religious feelings are generally lacking except among the adherents of some of the new religions. Japanese children usually do not receive formal religious training. On the other hand, many Japanese homes contain a Buddhist altar, butsudan, at which various rituals, some on a daily basis, commemorate deceased family members. Japan is remarkable for its extraordinarily rapid rate of economic growth in the 20th century, especially in the first several decades after World War II. This growth was based on unprecedented expansion of industrial production and the development of an enormous domestic market, as well as on an aggressive export trade policy. In terms of gross national product, GNP, or gross national income, a common indicator of a country's wealth, Japan is the world's second largest economic power, ranking behind only the United States. It has developed a highly diversified manufacturing and service economy and is one of the world's largest producers of motor vehicles, steel, and high-technology manufactured goods, notably consumer electronics. The service sector has come to dominate the economy in terms of its overall proportion of the gross domestic product, GDP, and of employment. The emphasis on trade stems from Japan's lack of the natural resources needed to support its industrial economy, notably fossil fuels and most minerals. In addition, the limited amount of arable land in the country forces Japan to import much of its food needs. Generally, however, Japan's strong domestic market has reduced the country's dependence on trade in terms of the proportion trade contributes to the GDP when compared with that of many other countries. It is common for Western observers of contemporary Japan to emphasize its great economic achievement without equal regard to cultural attributes. Yet Japanese cultural distinctiveness and the manner in which it developed are instructive in understanding how it is that Japan came to be the first non-Western country to attain great power status. The Japanese long have been intensely aware of and have responded with great curiosity to powerful outside influences, first from the Asian mainland, notably China, and more recently from the Western world. Japan has followed a cycle of selectively absorbing foreign cultural values and institutions and then adapting these to existing indigenous patterns, this latter process often occurring during periods of relative political isolation. Thus, outside influences were assimilated, but the basic sense of Japaneseness was unaffected. For example, Buddhist deities were adopted into the Shinto pantheon. Japan's effort to modernize quickly in the late 19th and 20th centuries, albeit undertaken at great national and personal sacrifice, was really an extension of the same processes at work in the country for centuries. Prehistoric Japanese culture was exposed to ancient Chinese cultural influences beginning some 2 millennia ago. One consequence of these influences was the imposition of the gridiron system of land division, which long endured. It is still possible to trace the ancient place names and field division lines of this system. Chinese writing and many other Chinese developments were introduced in the early centuries CE. The writing system underwent many modifications over the centuries, since it did not fit the Japanese language. Buddhism, which originated in India and underwent modification in Central Asia, China, and Korea before reaching Japan about the 6th century, also exerted a profound influence on Japanese cultural life, although over the course of time it was modified profoundly from its antecedent forms. Similarly, Chinese urban design was introduced in the layouts of the ancient capital cities of Nara and Kyoto but did not proliferate in the archipelago. The highly refined traditional arts of Japan include such forms as the tea ceremony, calligraphy, and ikebana, flower arranging, and gardening, as well as architecture, painting, and sculpture. The performing arts are distinguished by their blending of music, dance, and drama, rooted in different eras of the past. The major traditional theatrical forms, roughly in chronological order of their appearance, are bugaku, court dance and music, no, the classic form of dance drama, kaijin, a type of comic opera, bunraku, the puppet theater, and kabuki, drama with singing and dancing. Newer genres include Western-style shingeki, new theater, dramas and buto, a highly stylized dance form. Ikebana, the tea ceremony, and calligraphy are popular pursuits, particularly as aesthetic accomplishments for women. However, traditional Japanese painting, dance, and music have lost much of their earlier popularity, though the poetic forms of haiku and waka have continued to flourish. Western art forms have been fully embraced by the Japanese. Major cities often have several symphony orchestras, and Western-style painting, sculpture, and architecture are widely practiced. Numerous venues for Western classical music have been constructed throughout the country since the 1980s. In addition, a growing number of Japanese classical performers, including conductor Seiji Ozawa, music director of the Boston Symphony Orchestra for 3 decades, and violinist Goto Midori, have built reputations abroad. Also notable are conductor Takemitsu Toru, who incorporated avant-garde musical styles and traditional Japanese instruments into his classical music compositions, and music educator Suzuki Shinichi, whose method of violin instruction for children became world-renowned. The cinema has been highly successful at taking a Western form and putting it through a Japanese aesthetic filter to produce a distinctive style. Internationally acclaimed Japanese film directors include Kurosawa Akira, Oziu Yasujiro, Mizoguchi Kenji, and Itami Juzo. The number of Japanese moviegoers has dropped from its high point in the mid-20th century because of competition from television, videotapes, and later DVDs and video games, but innovations such as multiplex theaters, venues with multiple auditoriums, have increased attendance. Situated in one of Earth's most geologically active zones, Japan experiences volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Mountain ranges cover some 4/5 of its land surface. Its highest mountain is Mount Fuji. The economy, one of the world's biggest, is based largely on manufacturing and services. Exports include electronic and electrical equipment, motor vehicles, chemicals, and iron and steel products. The government's involvement in banking results in unique cooperation between the public and private sectors. Japan is one of the world's principal seagoing nations, with an important marine fishing sector. It is a constitutional monarchy with 2 legislative houses. Its symbol of state is the emperor, and the head of government is the prime minister. Human habitation in Japan is thought to date to at least 30,000 years ago. The Yamato court established the first unified Japanese state in the 4th to 5th century CE. During that period, Buddhism arrived in Japan by way of Korea. For centuries, Japan borrowed heavily from Chinese culture, but it began to sever its links with the mainland by the 9th century. The Fujiwara family was dominant through the 11th century. In 1192, Minamoto Yoritomo established Japan's first bakufu, or shogunate, see Kamakura period. The Muromachi period, 1338 to 1573, was marked by warfare between powerful families. Unification was achieved in the late 16th and early 17th centuries under the leadership of Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. During the Edo-Tokugawa period, 1603 to 1867, the government imposed a policy of isolation. Under the leadership of the Emperor Meiji, 1867 to 1912, it adopted a constitution, 1889, and began a program of modernization and westernization. Japanese imperialism led to war with China, 1894 to 95, and Russia, 1904-05, as well as to the annexation of Korea, 1910, and northeastern China, 1931. During World War II, Japan attacked U.S. forces in Hawaii and the Philippines, December 1941, and occupied European colonial possessions in Southeast Asia. In 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered to the Allies. A new democratic constitution was drafted, 1947, during the U.S. post-war occupation. Japan also began rebuilding its ruined industrial base, using new technology. A tremendous economic recovery followed, and Japan became one of the world's wealthiest countries. It was able to maintain a favorable balance of trade despite a long-term economic recession. In March 2011, a severe underwater earthquake off northeastern Japan generated devastating tsunami waves that caused massive destruction and loss of life in coastal areas there. Thanks for watching.